Hey, what's up? For most of modern history, few words have carried as much weight, horror, and historical baggage as the word Nazi. It is a word tied to one of the darkest chapters in human history, a word associated with totalitarian power, racial ideology, genocide, and the devastation of World War II. But today, in modern political arguments, the word gets thrown around constantly. On social media, in political speeches, and television debates, people call each other Nazis over immigration policy, over border security, over speech laws, over elections, over almost any political disagreement imaginable. The word that once described one of the most extreme and destructive regimes in history has increasingly become a casual insult. And that raises an important question. What does the word Nazi actually mean? Where did it come from? And why has the meaning of the word been so diluted in modern political discourse? To understand that, we have to go back to the beginning. The word Nazi did not originally come from Adolf Hitler or from the political party that ruled Germany in the 1930s and 1940s. In fact, the people who belonged to Hitler's movement did not typically call themselves Nazis. The political party at the center of this movement was officially called the National Socialist German Workers' Party. In German, that name was Nationalsozialistische Deutsche Arbeiterpartei, often shortened to the abbreviation NSDAP. Members of this movement referred to themselves as National Socialists. The word Nazi was actually a nickname, a slang term that emerged in Germany during the 1920s. The term itself likely evolved from an older Bavarian nickname derived from the name Ignaz. In some regions, Nazi had already been used informally to refer to someone seen as a simpleton or a rural bumpkin. Political opponents of the National Socialist movement began using the term as a mocking label. It was meant to belittle the movement and its followers. Over time, the nickname stuck, and eventually it became the most widely used word to describe the movement, both in Germany and internationally. But the political ideology behind that word was anything but simple. The National Socialist regime that came to power in Germany under Adolf Hitler in 1933 built a totalitarian state based on extreme nationalism, racial ideology, authoritarian control, and violent political repression. The regime outlawed opposition parties. It censored the press. It imprisoned political opponents, and it constructed a vast system of propaganda designed to control public thought. At the center of Nazi ideology was the concept of racial hierarchy. The regime promoted the idea that certain groups were biologically superior while others were considered inferior. This worldview eventually led to one of the most horrific crimes in human history, the Holocaust. During World War II, the Nazi regime carried out the systematic murder of 6 million Jews, along with millions of others, including political dissidents, Roma people, disabled individuals, and many others targeted by the regime's ideology. The word Nazi therefore became permanently associated with genocide, dictatorship, and authoritarian brutality. After the defeat of Nazi Germany in 1945, the word carried enormous historical weight. It represented a warning about how dangerous extremist political movements could become. For decades after the war, the term retained that seriousness. Calling someone a Nazi meant accusing them of supporting one of the most destructive and hateful ideologies in history. But in the decades since, especially in modern political discourse, the word has increasingly been used as a general insult rather than a precise historical term. Political opponents accuse each other of being Nazis. Government agencies are compared to Nazi secret police. Law enforcement is compared to the Gestapo. And politicians on all sides of the political spectrum have used these comparisons at different times. This kind of rhetoric has become increasingly common in the modern media environment. But there is a major problem with using the word this way. When a term that once described a historically specific and uniquely destructive ideology gets used casually to describe anyone someone disagrees with, the meaning of the word begins to erode. It loses its historical precision. It becomes less about history and more about emotional impact. In other words, it turns into a political weapon rather than a historical description. And when that happens, the original meaning of the word begins to fade. Calling someone a Nazi today often says more about the speaker's anger than it does about the person being accused. It becomes shorthand for person I strongly disagree with. But historically speaking, the Nazi regime was not simply a group of people someone disliked politically. It was a highly organized authoritarian state responsible for mass repression, aggressive war across Europe, and genocide on an unprecedented scale. When modern political arguments use the term casually, it risks flattening those historical realities into something trivial. There is also another consequence. When every political opponent is labeled a Nazi, the accusation stops having meaning. If everyone is a Nazi, then the word no longer describes anything specific. It becomes background noise. That doesn't just distort modern political debate. It also risks distorting the historical memory of what the Nazi regime actually was. Understanding history requires precision. Words matter. Definitions matter. The word Nazi refers to a specific political movement that existed in Germany during a specific historical period under a specific ideological framework. Reducing that history to a generic insult does not educate people. It confuses them. It turns history into rhetoric, and it prevents serious discussions about real authoritarianism, real extremism, and real historical lessons. The truth is that political disagreements are normal in democratic societies. People argue about policy, leadership, and ideology. But when political debate becomes dominated by extreme historical comparisons, it often shuts down meaningful conversation rather than improving it. Because once someone is labeled a Nazi, the conversation usually ends. And history becomes a tool for insult rather than understanding. So when people today use the word Nazi casually in political debates, it is worth remembering what that word originally described: a real regime, a real ideology, and real atrocities that reshaped the world. Understanding that history does not mean avoiding political disagreement, but it does mean using historical language carefully. Because when words lose their meaning, history itself becomes harder to understand. And when history becomes harder to understand, the lessons it carries become easier to forget.
Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe. Peace!